That we continue to do this, and yet we can have contemporary stories as well as the old stories that have been handed down.
Okay, so many moons ago, Ketantuit, who lived in the sky world, came down from the sky, and he was walking through the Wata. Can you say Wata?
Wata.
Which is forest. And as he walked through that Wata, he came to the ceremonial rock. And he climbed up on top of that rock and he sat there. And as he sat on that rock in the middle of the Wata, he admired all of creation. And the Ketampanishah, the rise of the morning sun, was just beginning to reach the tops of the tallest pines. And in the distance, he could hear the morning song of the Narragansetts. Weha, weha, yo-ya-ne, yo-ya-ne. Weha, weha, yo-ya-ne, yo-ya-ne. And he looked to the trees, and all of the birds had gathered to listen to the beautiful song of morning. And he realized that he had not given the birds a song of their own in his creation. And he thought maybe the birds too would enjoy a song. And so he called to the trees and he asked the birds if they too would like a song that they could sing at the rise of each morning sun. And the birds were so excited, they had prayed and dreamed that one day they too would have a song to sing along with the Narragansetts each morning. And so Ketantuit sent the birds off back to their villages to spread the word that the next morning, before the Ketampanishah, before the sun had reached the tops of the tallest pines, all of the birds were to gather, and one by one, each bird would have a chance to fly high and close to the sky world. And the bird who flew the highest and the closest to the sky world would get the most beautiful song in all of the world. Well, Ketantuit stayed sitting up on that rock into the evening, and as the Nipawus, the sun, began to set behind the trees, he could hear the evening song of the Narragansetts. Hamba jimada, hamba yanska, hamba jimada, hamba yanska. And he knew this was good. And so that next morning, the Ketampanishah rose bright and beautiful, and it filled the forest with beautiful light. And you could see that all of the birds had gathered in the trees, and those trees that were the closest to that ceremonial rock just wept to the ground, which is how we got the weeping willow tree. And Ketantuit asked, who will go first? Well, Brother Crow is very pushy. I don't know if you know this about Crow, but he's very pushy, and he said, me first, I'll go first, with my black wings, I certainly can fly high and make it all the way to Sky World. And so Ketantuit said, Brother Crow, take your turn, and Brother Crow opened his mighty black wings, and he began to fly higher and higher, but do you think he made it to the tops of the trees? No, that crow had to come back down, and he made his song. Does anybody know what Crow sings? What does Crow say? Caw, 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 caw. Well, then next it came time for Jay, and Jay said, I know I can make it higher than Crow. And he opened his blue wings, and he too flew higher and higher, but he didn't make it much higher. And he came back down with Jay, 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 Jay. Well, one by one, each of the birds began to take their turn. And then Hummingbird, she thought, I'll never fly as high as Crow, and I'll never fly as high as Jay. What will I do? And so that little hummingbird just took a moment to give thanksgiving. And she gave thanksgiving to the four directions. She gave thanksgiving for the opportunity to have this song. And after she had finished giving great thanksgiving, she opened her little tiny wings and she clapped them just as fast as she could. and she barely hovered above the ground. And she too received a beautiful song because she tried so hard, but not from out her beak, but from that beautiful hum of her wings. Well, sitting way in the back of all of the birds was the very tiny thrush. And this thrush was smaller than your hand, and little thrush thought, my wings can't flap as fast as hummingbirds, and I know I can't fly as high as crow. How will I ever make it to Sky World? Well, at that very moment, Wompsy-Cook stepped before Thrush. And Thrush had an idea. When Brother Eagle, Wompsy-Cook, was not looking, Thrush would crawl into his neck feathers. And when he flew the highest and the closest to the sky world, that little thrush would be tucked away, so hidden, that she'd jump out from the back of his neck and fly all the way into Sky World. Well, finally it came time for the larger birds to take their turn. There was Hawk and Osprey and Falcon. And one by one, each of these strong, mighty birds took flight. And they were soaring in the beautiful blue sky together. And one by one, they each made their descent. And finally, it came time for the greatest and the mightiest and the strongest of all of the birds to take his flight. And Wompsy-Cook opened those mighty wings. And he began to fly higher and higher. Brother Eagle soared above the trees and through the blue sky and in the clouds. And just as he was about to enter into Sky World, Wompsy-Cook decided to turn back. For he knew he had flown the highest. He knew he had flown the closest to the Sky World. And he didn't want to embarrass any of the other birds by flying all the way in. And so, as Wompsy-Cook began to make his descent back down to that ceremonial rock, that little thrush who had been hiding in his neck feathers jumped out from the back of his neck and flew all the way into Sky World. And when Thrush arrived, Thrush heard the most beautiful song in all the world. And she practiced it over and over again until it was perfect. Now, I know some of us may think we're perfect, but none of us truly are. And really that's what makes us all different and unique and special. Well, Thrush's song was perfect. And Thrush finally decided to make her descent back down to earth, back down to that ceremonial place to share this beautiful song. She practiced her la-la-las, the teeny-mees over and over again. And she couldn't wait because she knew how perfect her song was. And finally she arrived back down in the Wata, and she walked back very proud, back to that ceremonial rock where all of the birds had gathered. And she couldn't wait to share her song, but then she saw all of the birds that were staring at her, just as all of you are staring at me right now. And that thrush grew so ashamed and so embarrassed, for she knew she had cheated. And she hung her head low, and she turned, and she began to walk deep, deep into the forest. And to this day, if you want to hear the most beautiful song in all the world, you must walk deep into the forest, sit very, very quietly, and if you are lucky, you might hear the song of the woodland thrush. I always like to remember my grandmother telling stories, and when I think of her, she always liked to bring in the little people and the specialness that they are there, that spirit world is all around us.
Thanks for watching. This podcast series is presented by Tamaclog Museum. Visit our website at www.tamaqua.museum.org. Tamaqua Arts programs are sponsored by Amica Insurance. Auto, Home, Life, Amica. With support from NIFA and the Native Arts Program. The Indigenous Artways Podcast is funded in part by the Rhode Island State Council of the Arts. Investment in arts and culture. Illustrations and production by Jarrod Swiftcloud Best. Music presented by Eagle and Hawk. www.eagleandhawk.com. Support this and other great podcast content at our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/artways.